You don't have to stay if it's pity.
My name is Michael, and I was completely set up. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a project manager for a construction company. I'm the kind of guy people like because I'm easygoing and reliable, which is another way of saying I'm boring. I don't have hobbies that excite people. I don't have a tragic backstory that makes me interesting. I just exist, reasonably well-adjusted and completely unremarkable. My sister has spent the last 2 years on a mission to fix this. She says I need to date more, to get out of my comfort zone, to live a little. I tell her I'm fine as I am. She ignores me and sets me up on blind dates anyway. The blind date in question was supposed to be with someone named Elena. My sister's friend's cousin, recently moved to the city, looking to meet people. My sister made it sound appealing enough. Elena apparently worked in graphic design, loved travel, was cultured and interesting. It sounded like the kind of date that would get my sister off my back for a few weeks. I showed up at the coffee shop on a Saturday morning, and I was fully prepared to have a mediocre coffee and politely explain to my sister that Elena wasn't my type. What I wasn't prepared for was Elena being in a wheelchair. Not just any wheelchair, a motorized one that she controlled with ease. And not that the wheelchair was the most noticeable thing about her. What was most noticeable was her expression when I walked in. She actually saw me, and her face shifted into something between amusement and resignation. "Let me guess," she said as I sat down across from her. "Your sister didn't mention the wheelchair." "She did not," I admitted, caught off guard by her directness. "Yeah," Elena said, spinning her chair slightly so she could face me better. "That's usually how these go. Well-meaning family member sets up a person with a disability with an unsuspecting non-disabled person. Unsuspecting person shows up expecting one thing, sees the wheelchair, and has an internal crisis about whether to stay or bolt." "I'm not having an internal crisis," I said, which was a lie. I was definitely having some kind of internal crisis, just not the one she was describing. "Good," she said. "Because honestly, if you're going to panic about my mobility status, I'd rather you do it now so we don't waste each other's time." I picked up the coffee menu to give myself something to do with my hands. "So what's your story?" Elena asked. "Let me guess. Successful, stable, never been married, your sister thinks you're lonely, and you agreed to this date because saying no to family is harder than just showing up." "That's weirdly accurate," I said. "I have good instincts," she said. "Comes with the territory. When you can't run away from difficult situations, you get very good at reading people. So let me ask you directly, are you staying because you want to know me, or because you're too polite to leave?" I set down the menu and looked at her directly. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I got set up for what I thought was going to be a certain kind of date, and now I'm sitting across from you, who is clearly not what I expected, and I don't know what happens next." Elena nodded slowly. "Okay. That's honest. I can work with honest. So here's the deal, stay for coffee. Actually talk to me like I'm a person, not a puzzle you're trying to solve or a charity case you're trying to help. And if at any point you decide this isn't what you want, you can leave. No judgment. No hard feelings." "Okay," I said. I stayed for coffee. And then I stayed for lunch. Elena told me about her accident, a car crash when she was 24. She'd been in the passenger seat, the driver had been texting, and in the 2 seconds it took him to look at his phone, they'd hit a guardrail. The driver walked away with minor injuries. Elena spent 6 months in the hospital and 18 months in rehabilitation, learning how to be a person in a world not built for people in wheelchairs. She told me this like she was reading a recipe, factual and matter-of-fact. But I could hear the weight underneath the words. "It sucked," she said plainly. "It still sucks sometimes. But I'm not going to apologize for being disabled, and I'm not going to pretend that my disability is the most interesting thing about me. So if you stick around, you need to understand that my wheelchair is part of my life, but it's not my entire identity." "I understand," I said. "Do you, though?" she asked. "Because I've dated guys who say they understand, but what they actually mean is they understand intellectually. What they don't understand is that dating me is going to be inconvenient sometimes. Venues aren't accessible. People will stare. Sometimes my body won't cooperate, and I'll be in pain. and you're going to have to decide if you want to deal with those realities, not just the theoretical concept of dating someone disabled. I thought about what she was saying. I thought about the fact that most of the dates I'd been on were easy because they required nothing of me. This was different. This was actually going to require something. Okay, I said. I want to try. But I'm probably going to mess up. I'm probably going to say something stupid or make an assumption that's offensive. You probably will, Elena agreed. But here's the thing, if you're trying, and you're willing to listen when I tell you that you messed up, then we can work with that. What I won't do is date someone who treats me like a victim or a hero project. I don't think that's what this is, I said, and I meant it. There was nothing victim-like about Elena. She was sharp and funny and completely comfortable in her own skin in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable in mine. We exchanged numbers when we left the coffee shop. Elena gave me her address and told me she'd text me a list of accessible restaurants where we could have a real date. I watched her maneuver her wheelchair out of the coffee shop with practiced ease, and I realized that I'd been thinking about this all wrong. Our first real date was at a Thai restaurant that Elena had vetted for accessibility. The entrance was ramped, the bathroom was spacious, and the table could accommodate her wheelchair without any weird maneuvering. Elena had prepared for this. She knew where she could and couldn't go, and she planned accordingly. I, on the other hand, was a mess. I kept asking if she needed help with things, and she kept pointing out that my offer to help was about my need to feel useful, not about her actual needs. She could navigate the restaurant. She could cut her own food. What she needed was for me to stop treating her like a problem to be solved. I get it, I said finally, frustrated. You're independent. You don't need me. That's not what I'm saying, Elena said, and there was patience in her voice that I didn't deserve. I'm saying I don't need you to be my savior. I need you to be my partner. There's a difference. A partner asks what I need. A savior assumes. I took that to heart. Over the next few weeks, I learned how to date Elena. I learned that she had a wicked sense of humor and wasn't afraid to make jokes about her disability, but she didn't appreciate when other people did. I learned that some days her body caused her pain, and on those days, she wanted to be left alone with a book and her own company, and that was completely fine. I learned that accessibility wasn't a luxury feature. It was a basic necessity that society had failed to provide, and it made her angry in a way that was completely justified. I also learned that I'd been living my life in a very small box. Elena pushed me to try new things, to leave my comfort zone, to question my assumptions about how the world worked. She was brilliant and creative, and she saw things most people missed because she'd been forced to pay attention to how the world was built. 3 months into dating, we went to her apartment for dinner. It was the first time I was seeing her space, and it was exactly what I expected. Carefully organized, thoughtfully decorated, optimized for her mobility. She'd made dinner herself, and we ate on her couch, and it felt domestic in a way that surprised me. I need to ask you something, she said after we'd finished eating, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay, I said. Are you staying because you actually care about me, or are you staying because you're afraid of looking like an asshole if you leave? Elena. I'm serious, she said. Because I've seen the way you watch me sometimes, like you're proud of yourself for dating someone disabled. Like it makes you a good person. And I don't want to be your good deed. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the truth. When I first met you, I said slowly, I was definitely having some complicated feelings about the wheelchair. But that's not why I'm here anymore. I'm here because you're interesting. You're funny. You see the world in a way that makes me want to see it differently. You challenge me. And yeah, you're disabled, and that's part of who you are, but it's not the only thing I see when I look at you. Okay, she said. But what about the hard stuff? What about when things get really difficult? What about when my disability becomes an actual obstacle instead of just a fact about me? Then we figure it out, I said. Together. Like partners do. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took my hand. You don't have to stay if it's pity, she whispered, and it sounded like something she'd said to herself 1,000 times before. But I'm really glad you are. 1 year later, I asked Elena to marry me. I did it in her favorite place, a botanical garden that had excellent accessibility and some of the most beautiful architecture she'd ever seen. We'd spent hours there before, Just walking, in her case, wheeling, through the garden, talking about life and dreams and what we wanted. When I got down on one knee, which required some careful maneuvering because I wanted to be at eye level with her, I told her something I'd come to understand over the past year. "You asked me once if I was staying out of pity," I said. "And the answer is no. I'm staying because you make me want to be better. I'm staying because you challenge me and make me think. I'm staying because I love you. Not as a charity case, not as a project, not as something to be proud of. I love you as the person you are. So will you marry me?" She said yes, and she cried, and I cried, and everyone at the botanical garden that day was watching us and probably crying too. At our wedding, Elena walked down the aisle with a cane. It was a choice she'd made. Most days she used her wheelchair, but that day she wanted to do something different. And when I asked her about it later, she said it wasn't about proving anything or overcoming her disability. It was just what felt right that day. That, I'd learned, was what disability actually was. Not inspiration porn. Not a tragedy to overcome. Just a part of how her body worked, and something she navigated with the same practicality she brought to everything else in her life. 2 years after our wedding, Elena and I were sitting on our balcony, watching the city lights. "I was thinking," she said, "about that first coffee date. Do you remember being annoyed that your sister tricked you?" "Absolutely," I said. "I was furious. And now I'm grateful," I said. "She gave me the best thing that ever happened to me." Elena smiled. "You know what the best thing about you is," she said. "What?" "You learned," she said. "You came in with all these preconceived notions about disability and charity and what it means to be with someone like me. And instead of staying stuck in those notions, you actually listened. You actually learned. You let me change the way you see the world." "You changed the way I see everything," I said, and I meant it. "Good," Elena said. She squeezed my hand. "That's what love is supposed to do." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more heartfelt tales, and drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Thanks for being part of the Unscripted Stories community.